Hello, I'm Matthias Anderson, and I'm a developer advocate at Pluralsight. We are here at the Link 2023 event in New Orleans, but I am joined today by Glenn and Jonathan and Becca. And we have some interesting conversation we've been having already, and we wanted to bring some of that to this stream so that all of the rest of you can benefit from it as well. So today we'll be talking a bit about, is tech a solitary activity? Is it something that is best done alone, or is it best done with groups in various different ways? But I want each of our esteemed panelists to introduce themselves. So Glenn, do you mind starting?
Sure, yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Glenn Block. I am the CEO of a company called ProdSense, and we focus on, it's a fractional CPO, so working with startups and specifically putting a focus on equitable product development. And I've been in tech for about 25 years, worked at Microsoft for about 10 years, and a bunch of startups like Auth0. And yeah, it's just great to be here. Big fan of community.
Yeah. I'm Jonathan Creamer, and I'm currently at Microsoft, and I work for Office doing JavaScript tooling for the front end, and that's like a niche inside of a niche, which is really cool, and which is why I love talking about community, because I feel like being a niche inside of a niche means we don't talk about it enough and talk to each other enough. Not even within my own company, even within Microsoft, I sometimes struggle to find that balance of talking to people around Microsoft, and then I really want to talk to other companies to see how big companies are handling the same scale challenges that I'm having. So yeah, I've been doing tooling for a few years now, and was at Eventbrite, Lonely Planet before that. In New Orleans, oh my gosh, I love the city so much, so thanks so much for having us down here. It is just so much fun.
Well, it's our privilege to have you all. Becca?
Yeah, I'm Becca Harrott-Weigel, and I am the creator and one of the maintainers for Virtual Coffee Community, and I am also the developer experience lead at OpenSauced. I came into tech just a couple of years ago. I spent 10 years teaching college English before moving over into tech, and before that I was a community organizer. So I've always been experiencing communities in different ways, and I think, you know, the biggest impact was learning how to do that in tech and how welcoming it can be and how much I could grow through that community experience. So I'm really happy to be here. Thanks again for having us.
Well, I'm really glad that we could all get together to jump in. And one of the things about this conference here at Link is that we're having people connect together. We're linking up a number of different people so that... Whoa! That's a surprising development for the studio, but we'll fix that later.
I think that sign says exorcism.
I might have been feeling it wasn't included. So.
Yeah, but the point of this event is to have a bunch of people connect together, but we want to share that. We don't want to just have it be with us. And so a lot of the conversations that are happening will turn into live streams. So that's the point of this. So stay tuned to these channels, because over the next couple of days, we'll be having a lot of really interesting live streams from these conversations. And then the next day after that, we're also having Tech Skills Day. So there's even more conversations, different talks that have been put together so that we can share again and help all of you learn. So let's get back to then the discussion today, right now in this stream, about community. So we were talking a little bit earlier, and you mentioned that you've done a lot with community, Becca. Do you want to talk a little bit more about why it is that you value community so much?
Yeah, and I'm going to go into a little bit of a story, and I think storytelling is a big part of community building. And
Definitely.
I came into tech after going through a trauma, and it took me a long time to kind of like figure out who I was in that instance. And when I was in boot camp, my boot camp educational coach also went through trauma, and she told me her story. And I felt like I was recognized for the first time in a really long time. Mm-hmm. When I told her I was writing down my story, I said, I don't know why I'm writing it down. And she said, Becca, we don't share our stories for ourselves. We share them to invite others to share with us. And that really kind of opened my eyes, because there was a need for connection. You know, the last thing that you want to do when you've gone through trauma is to be in isolation. And even with the pandemic in the last couple of years, we were all in isolation together. Yeah. And I found through that experience that through research that humans are actually built for storytelling, and they're built for connections. Our neurotransmitters fire, we have hormones that are released, and all of these things are driving us to connect with other people. And it can be really hard and really scary, but when we talked about vulnerability a little bit before this conversation. When you're willing to be vulnerable, then you're able to make those connections, which actually help you to grow so much more when you're able to feel good in those situations. So it can be really scary, but when you find the right community for you, then you can feel really supported and you can grow a lot more in those situations. And so that's why I think it's one of the most undervalued things in your career and your life journey.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you all being vulnerable to jump onto this conversation and sharing your stories. I appreciate that a lot.
Thanks.
I think that there's so much that we can all learn from each other. That's one of the things that I keep coming back to is that by myself, it's not the same. I don't have the same insights. But Jonathan, did you have some things you wanted to add as well?
Yeah, I think like my entire tech journey started because I was in isolation at a company. I came out of college and my college did like a terrible job explaining to me that there was like a tech industry. That not only did it not explain like what that's like, how to get a job in it, like how much money I should make, those kinds of crazy things, but also like there's a lot of people out there that are going to do what you do.
Yeah.
And this is how you can get to know them. And I don't know how, but I came across a user group somehow. I think it was just like Googling it back like 10 years ago, how to get connected in Nashville. And I found Nash.net. And I was like, okay, cool. So I found a like-minded group of .NET developers because I had just switched from Cold Fusion to .NET. This was forever ago. And then found them. And then through them, I met a guy you might know. And I was there at his first talk. And his name is David Neal.
Aha!
So David Neal and I met in 2011 or 12. And he heard my first talk there. I heard his first talk there. And that was where I sort of fell in love with this idea of like community. And it was like 10 or 20 of us up to like 50 some weeks that we'd have. And from there, like we just stayed in touch over the years. And I realized that there's also this thing called Twitter, which is where I found guys like Glenn and Scott Hanselman. And back then, Microsoft was not super open source yet, but these guys changed that. And like over the next few years, I was like, I want to do that. I want to work at a company that's willing to. I know you guys literally. I'm here and doing what I do because of what you guys did back then. Like that is a true story. Yes. and Scott is still at Microsoft, and I hope he could hear some of this too. And that was what inspired me to really stay. And I became, through the years, I'm here now because of that, getting together, user groups and conferences over the years. So yeah, do not do tech in isolation. And I feel like if we can teach any of our early in career folks, that's. I've done a lot of interviewing since I was at Microsoft, and most of the time in mentoring, and the first thing I tell them is, this is something that we're going to do together. This is not something, don't put your head in the sand. Yeah, don't think that like you have a problem and you can't come ask me for help or go ask Nico or Sabrina, anybody on my team for help. Like this is a community thing, even within my own team. And outside of that, I'm like, look, I know it sounds weird, but please get on Twitter. I know, but it's a thing. Like that's just a great place for us to communicate. Amongst the dozens of other communities, the coffee and Discords and Slacks and everything.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is that there's so much value in learning from others and being a part of that conversation. So when you were talking about you were learning from other people, you only could learn from them because they were willing to share those things, right? Like if they had just had those thoughts.
That's the vulnerability part.
Yeah.
Too.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry. Did you want to add more to that?
No, sorry.
It was just it's a really good point, I think. I think we're all emphasizing it in different ways, right? That the vulnerability of jumping into something like that is important. I think one of the interesting things that comes to my mind about that is that even when you are vulnerable in that way, you can benefit from that, right? Like it's not just you give up. It's that by doing that, by being willing to put yourself into those conversations, you can learn that, oh, you're not an imposter, for example, right? That there are other ideas that you hadn't thought about, and that's not wrong that you didn't have those ideas. That's the value of having community and connection with other people. You won't have all of the ideas by yourself. You need to be having conversations to learn. So, did you want to talk also a little bit about your sort of journey into?
First, I want to thank Becca for sharing your story and being vulnerable with us. And sorry that you went through that trauma. I've had plenty of trauma as well, and I think also kudos to you for your courage and making that transition, and I mean that from my heart. I love your story. And Jonathan, I'm so glad to be part of your journey in some way, and you're doing awesome stuff, so that's amazing. Community has changed my life, and I'm realizing in this conversation, so I started using computers when I was 7 years old. I tell this to a lot of people. And I grew up in New York, and at that time, like, this is like before the internet, when we had like bulletin boards. Like, I ran a bulletin board. Bulletin boards were all about community.
Yeah.
So at 12, 13, I was getting into community and had people from all over the world, actually, that I was communicating with through my dial-up phone.
Yeah. Ka-ching.
But then I remember too, because I was self-taught in programming and stuff like that at this young age, and the worst thing my mom did was let me have a computer in my room because I'd be up at 3 in the morning when I should be sleeping, writing code. But I remember growing up in New York in Long Island that I joined the Long Island Computer Association. And this was early days what community was. And in those days, computing wasn't, in some ways, I'd say it was really welcoming in that if people came in, like you found all these people that wanted to help you, but the barrier to entry was pretty high. So you really had to be like committed and know what you were doing. And but I remember going to these Leica meetings, which were like once a month. And it was just like a bunch of geeks that would like get together at like a local university and meet up. But that was community.
Right.
And what happened even then is I met people. And some of those people that even back then that formed into connections because I started running a bulletin board. I met a guy who ran a bulletin board and he explained to me what it was and then I ran it. But I think what's been different is, like the way that technology's progressed, it's opened the floodgates for a lot more people to come in and the barrier to entry has gone down as far as on like your level of tech experience that you need to get in the door.
Yeah.
And I think the challenge of that sometimes is gatekeeping. People who feel like you shouldn't be here, even like what Becca was saying. And I just would say like my thing is like I have committed myself to removing those gates and barriers. Like everybody can be here.
Yeah.
And we create all these artificial ideas that stand in the way of people being welcome in the community. And they're just old ideas that like need to go away. And even though I'm kind of old, I'm trying to like get rid of those things. But community has changed my life. It has brought me around the world. It has created new opportunities. It brought me to write a book. And it's like, it's amazing. And I think that as individuals, one of the things I've tried to do over the years is have more empathy and realize, like I'm benefiting from being part of the community, but I also have power to make sure other people have a good experience. And so I've tried to become more and more conscious about that. I remember like when I was trying to break in and Microsoft changed my life. Like I joined Microsoft and everything changed. Prior to that, nobody knew who I was. Nobody was like, and I remember trying to like, there were people that I was trying to follow that didn't really respond well. Like maybe some of them thought I was like a stalker. I would see them at conferences. I was so hungry. So later on, when I got into the position where I could now be different than the people who treated me the way that they treated me, it was so like amazing. And it's like, now I talk to so many people because I'm just like, hey, I remember. And I'm not going to be that person who's like, oh man, here comes Glenn, I better go. He's going to try to talk to me about how he can get here or get there. So I would just say for people who have benefited from it, I believe you have an obligation, like use that benefit you have to pay it forward and help others.
Yeah, I felt the same way because I had a person when I was young who took me under his wing at 13 and taught me how to computer and gave me my first domain, jonathancreamer.com. And I had that one person, and I talked about him all the time. His name is Jeremy DeYoung. And he just, every Saturday I would go hang out with him. My parents would drop me off at his office. I'd splice cables. I'd learn Cold Fusion. I'd learn HTML. And that one person invested his Saturdays. He was 21 and I was 13. I'm like, and I think about that all the time now. Like, that was crazy. I can't even imagine that 34 picking up, doing that with some. But that's why now I feel like community, I have to pay it forward.
Yes.
Like, it's in my bones now at this point. Like, I can't not try to have this community.
I hear you. Yeah. I think that we've been talking about a lot of different things. So just as sort of a, I'm working out sort of my understanding of the different topics. So we've got community inside of an organization with the people that you work with. We've got a mentoring relationship there, as sometimes a formal or sometimes an informal part of that. We have connecting with people on virtual communities. We have connecting in person at meetups. All of these different types of communities. Which of those, Becca, sort of jumps out to you as I think that people should try to invest in whatever? Like, what jumps out at you?
I think so. It's so different for everybody, but for me, I would say a couple of years ago, I definitely would have described myself as a shy introvert. And I was very afraid of meeting new people, and I had gone to a couple of conferences and felt very isolated there because I didn't know anyone and I couldn't quite make my way in. And I've been to some good in-person conferences where people talk about the Pac-Man method and making sure that there's always space for new people.
Yeah.
And I found that through online communities, I was able to make connections that led to better experiences in person.
Yeah.
So that introvertedness and the shyness that I have, they don't seem so overwhelming when I'm in that experience. So even coming here, I don't really know that many people. I've met a lot of them on Twitter, and a couple of years ago, I would have thought, like, there's no way. I already have anxiety. I already feel very nervous about it. But the fact that I know these people and I've had some interactions with them has made it a lot easier for me to benefit from this experience and enjoy and learn. And so I think, like, finding your comfort level and what brings you energy and joy is the method to pursue.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Finding what works for you of all of the different options and opportunities. One thing you mentioned the Pac-Man method. Do you want to just briefly describe what is the Pac-Man method?
Yeah, sure. And I just want to say, I learned this from Kyle Shevlin. The first conference I think I ever
Kyle.
went to was Revolution Conference.
Okay.
And so I was there with my husband, who's also an engineer. But there's a group of people standing. And the idea is you never close the circle. And so there should always be a space because Pac-Man
Somebody
has
else
his
can
mouth
get in.
open,
Yeah.
right? And there should always be a space for that person. So you want to create a meaningful
That's a great
opportunity.
idea.
And there's definitely ways to do that online. At Virtual Coffee, we lean into the hand raise function and letting
Right.
people know what expectations are for them in that environment. But like always finding that space for one more person and inviting them to your group.
I love that.
I love that
That is
too.
just
Pac-Man
such a concrete and useful thing to keep in mind, that when you're having those conversations, open it up. Like, just always open it up. Pac-Man,
It's the
Pac-Man.
anti-gatekeeping.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
like it. I'm gonna start using that term more.
Somebody's
Yeah,
told us
I-
about that at Connect Tech, I think Kyle, and we would intentionally, literally
Yes.
leave a space in the group to make sure that people could come in with us.
I love that. You mentioned it just as sort of a by the way, and I realized that I didn't quite know what you meant there, and so I'm really glad that you could explain that to me so that I could learn it, and then I'm sure everyone who's watching as well can be benefiting from that.
I didn't know that term.
I
so
appreciate
now
you
I'm-
asking.
Yeah. No, but I mean, that's for me, that's the value of being able to connect with people and ask that question. Like, I was asking myself, should I have known? Like, what is the Pac-Man method? Is this something that I should know? But I got to ask, because otherwise I can't learn that,
Curiosity.
right? And
Curiosity.
yeah. Actually, that's another thing that keeps coming up, the curiosity, embracing curiosity. And I think that embracing curiosity in a group can be a really powerful thing. We feed off of each other.
And I think that's also like the theme of like building communities. Like building communities, you need curiosity and empathy, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you need to be not like trying to impose your idea, not basing your interactions with people on your pure perspective.
Yeah.
And being open, and also realizing that everybody's different.
Yeah.
And you can't, engage with everybody the same way. And that's beautiful if you see it that way.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I was going to ask for a wrap up, and I think that's a really beautiful way. Is there some last comment that you want to make? We have just like 1 minute left, so
I'd
20
say
seconds.
Jonathan should bake it. He's been very quiet.
Oh, no. I think, like, one of the things that we've come back to a lot is, like, yes, community is awesome, but, like, how do I get started? If I am this introverted person, if I am this tech person that's like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
I think we kind of called it out earlier. It starts with vulnerability.
Yeah.
And maybe it's that one tweet, or it's that follow that one person and comment on that one thing. Like, I met Nick, who introduced me to Becca on Twitter, and now we're here talking together.
Yeah.
And that's just, it could take one person that you meet that does one thing. And now
I mean, I just
Yeah.
joined this conversation.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it could
Kind of
be
ended up here.
Yeah.
It could be.
But it was you know, it's
You
that
mentioned
vulnerability.
the bulletin boards. Like, it doesn't have to be face to face at first.
No.
Like, talk on Twitter, start
Yeah.
a blog, write one blog post.
LinkedIn.
So many free
So
blog
many-
platforms.
so many
LinkedIn.
content,
All of a
yeah.
sudden, I kind of like scroll through LinkedIn. All of a sudden, it's kind
Yeah.
of fun actually.
Well, we're live on LinkedIn right now, and I see
Yeah.
a number of people. Good morning, hello, good morning, good evening, because
Yeah.
people all
Nice.
around the world are jumping into the
So,
conversation.
That's
So
awesome.
thanks for joining us.
Put yourself out there and be vulnerable, and you'll find a community kind of by accident a lot of the time.
awesome, awesome.
Definitely agree with that.
Becca, do you want the last word? What would you say as sort of a last word? What do you want to say?
There are plenty of communities out there, and if you think that there's not one for you, there is. It might be a little hard to find it, and it might take some asking around. But don't be afraid to explore different communities, or even communities you've been part of for a long time. They might not serve you anymore. Find the one that serves you.
I love it. That's a great way to end our conversation here. But so thank you again, all three of you, for
Yeah, thank you
joining
for hosting
me
this
here,
conversation.
and thank you all for joining us on this stream. I look forward to more streams coming up for the rest of the day and tomorrow, and Tech Skills Day the next day. So we've got a lot of stuff coming. But thank you all very much.
Awesome.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.